am here today with my friend Brian Booth Craig. He was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he is a contemporary sculptor who specializes in the bronze medium. Sculpting from life, Booth Craig's work translates observationally derived figures into contemporary icons. His female nudes are imbued with a sense of agency, mixing 21st century gestures with surprising talismans. His statues are very much of our time, despite the medium's classical origins. Versed in nature, Booth Craig's figures capture moments of individual self-assertion. Booth Craig holds a BA from Pennsylvania State University, as well as an MFA from the New York Academy of Art, and is an honorary member of the International Sculpture Center. He is also a former apprentice of the painter and sculptor Audrey Flack. So welcome, Brian. I'm so excited to have you today and to interview you.
Thank you.
So tell us, Brian, a little bit more about your upbringing in Pittsburgh, and when was it that you first were inspired by art?
I grew up just outside of the city, and I always knew I was an artist, probably from I was about 5 years old, about that age. And it was my mother really who recognized it and pushed me to pursue it. And when I was a kid, probably about 6 or 7 years old, my mother found a local painter who had a studio in her basement, and she would take me there every Saturday for private art lessons. And then eventually she started taking me into Pittsburgh to the Carnegie Museum of Art, where they had like an after school and Saturday morning art class type of thing. Same sort of thing that Andy Warhol did, actually. He grew up in the same area. So it's the same program. And I did that up until I went into high school. So I had it around me all the time, even though I wasn't in a family of artists. Nobody in my family is an artist. I'm the only one.
Wow.
But I had the support of my family, my parents, particularly my mother, and like I said, I knew when I was very young that I wanted to be an artist.
How did you know that?
Well, a couple of reasons. One, it just felt natural to me, and it was my mother's encouragement. But I also had like a lot of positive feedback from like my art teacher in school, my elementary school. I remember doing this drawing of I think I had a crush on her, actually, because I was like in third grade, and I did this drawing of a deer, and I took it in and gave it to her as a gift. And and here's the funny thing: I got home that day, and I saw my mother, and my mom said, "Oh, Miss Huber called, or not Miss Huber. What's her name? Oh shoot, I can't think of her name now." So anyway, she said she called and asked if you traced that drawing, if you had like seen it in the book and you traced it. She didn't believe that you drew it.
Wow. And how old were you?
That was third grade. So what is third grade? How old is that? Like
Pretty
10,
young.
don't know, 8, something like that. Yeah, so it's pretty young. Anyway, yeah. So I think that I think having that kind of encouragement made it seem like a possibility that I could be an artist. And yeah, I just knew it. I don't know. It's hard to explain. I just knew it. I had a couple of um, very sort of mystical experiences too when I was a kid
Tell
that
me more.
reinforced that.
Tell us
Well,
more.
it's a long story. It's a long story, but it sounds crazy because I had audible voices speaking to me
Mm.
and telling me that I was that I
You were
was
clairaudient, is what they call it, clairaudient.
yeah,
Here,
exactly. It was a
things.
voice in my
Yes.
sort of inspiring me, telling me to pursue it. I know it sounds crazy. I won't tell the whole story,
No,
um,
it doesn't sound
but
crazy at all.
uh, but yeah. So I don't know. I think it was just a combination of experiences that made me feel confident in that. But the thing is that once I got to be a teenager, there are lots of barriers at that point for becoming an artist because in our culture, it's not really something that you're pushed to pursue. It's
Right.
not people can be discouraging. Not my family, but just the guidance counselors or people in high school or whatever. I didn't have a lot of I didn't have a lot of help when I got to that age. So I took a detour for a few years when I first went to college, and eventually found my way back to it. But there's
Mhm.
probably 3 or 4 years there where I didn't really do much artistically. And then I just finally, it was actually my mother called me. It was always her. She called me one day. I must have been a sophomore in university, and she was like, "When are you going to start pursuing art again?" She thought,
Wow.
yeah.
Is your mother still alive, Brian?
My mother passed away 9 years ago.
Mm.
So
Yeah, well, it sounds like she was really your angel guiding you.
yeah,
Uh,
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, she was.
That
She
is
was.
so beautiful. And how powerful that really is, thinking about children and creativity and how it's sometimes almost stripped away from us,
Yeah,
from the people around us, and think of how many people out there are so creative on the inside, and they haven't been awakened to share that gift, right? And all it takes is one person like your mom or a friend or someone who loves you, who really sees that in you, to encourage you, because it's true, children don't know that they have this inside of them, but they don't know that they really could pursue it.
yeah,
All they
yeah,
needed was a little bit of help and guidance.
yeah, it's true. And I think also our culture doesn't really value creativity the way it should, at least in the United States. I mean, we don't, like, kids do like they do 1 hour of art a week, in school. That's it. They don't, it's just a very, um, it's a very impractical way to approach living, at
Yes.
least in this culture. But of course, I agree with you. I think everyone has that inside of them, and there are a variety of ways of expressing creativity. But we just need to encourage it in people, and it's one of the reasons why, like, when I do teach workshops, which is not that frequently, but when I teach them, I I like the fact that I have a lot of people taking the courses that are not necessarily professional artists, but they just want to pursue it because they enjoy it. And
Right.
some people, yeah, I think that's a key. That's a really important message to send, that it doesn't have to be a career for it to have value. Um, but
Exactly.
you grew up in a family of artists, so
Yes.
you had a good surrounding environment for that.
Oh, 100%, especially my mom, because my mom's family is, all artists, right? So
Yeah,
I can't imagine what it would have been like if I didn't have some sort of encouragement there. And even my dad's side, like, it's very musical, both sides very musical. So
yeah.
I was always surrounded by that, thank goodness. But back to you, I wanted to ask, so you did that drawing, and like, was that the first, curiosity of yours, drawing? Did you delve into painting? Like, when was it that you discovered sculpture after that?
Okay, so I like the private lessons I took with that woman. She would teach. It was drawing and painting.
Okay.
So like, probably from about 6 years old, I was painting. There were still lives and that kind of thing, and she was teaching me perspective. But I didn't start sculpting until I was in my 20s. I started sculpting kind of late. Um, and the funny thing is that I haven't painted since then. Really, I just, like, I stopped painting entirely once I discovered sculpture. But I was in my 20s, so I started that kind of late, actually. But it felt natural. Like, it didn't really seem like a struggle in a way. I mean, obviously any art form takes a lot of work, but it just seemed kind of natural. Um, and that wasn't until I got to university. And the university program that I was in was very, it was very conceptual, and not there was not representation was not taught. So I was really teaching myself how to sculpt, representationally, figures and
And
portraits, whatever.
what drew you to the representational nature as opposed to, the more conceptual?
Wow, that's a good question. I think, you know the it's hard to really say. It's hard for me to remember back and think of the order of things, how they happened.
Hmm.
But I do recall we had to do, in one of the sculpture classes, we had to do a portrait, and we could pick anybody we wanted. I chose one of my friends. She was a painter, and I did her portrait, and it just felt good. It felt right. So it wasn't any there was no yeah, there was nothing, like, in the education itself that led me to that. It was just kind of random that it happened. I mean, I very easily could have gone in another direction artistically, I think. Um, but fortunately, I found do now. Um, but
Right.
yeah, but my undergraduate education was it was very conceptual, and yeah, it was a completely different kind of thing.
Mhm.
And I actually think that in a way, like that education was kind of good because it really gave me an ability to articulate my ideas artistically, and uh, and it was a that was kind of it was a like it was pretty rigorous intellectually. You had to do a lot of writing is in the program, so I think it was good. But
Mhm.
but I did, you know, having said all that, I didn't really start doing representation until I was in my 20s. So, you know, I had some catching up to do, quite a
Mhm.
bit of catching up to do.
Yeah,
Um,
I can relate with
but yeah, I found a way to do it.
the conceptual, like even for me in school and university during my undergrad, it was very conceptual work as well. You know, very geared towards that. But I think I also just felt like you know the representational painting came naturally to me, and I don't know, there's something about seeing something come to life that was really inspiring for me, and I just wanted the work to be beautiful. Do you know what I mean? So but I think the
Yeah,
conceptual part of your learning is it's an important part of being an artist, right? And it adds to it. So yeah, I definitely think
yeah,
that's
for sure. And I don't. Yeah, and I think also like one of the problems with the art world, or the way it's developed in the last, well, this has probably been going on for a long time, but it's really apparent. Was apparent when I was in school, and then later I
mhm.
think one of the problems is that we make these all these artificial distinctions between genres,
Yes.
like, you know, like abstraction versus representation versus conceptual work, and I personally see it all as one
I know
big pool
it
with
is.
different ways of expressing. Yeah, I don't I look at all kinds of art. I do. I look at everything that comes, you know, comes across me. But um I don't think that I was necessarily going to be as good at doing that kind of work. I think the representational work just was my it was my natural waters to swim in, you know. Um but
Naturally to you, it just
uh
came out of you that way.
yeah, the but I do yeah, the other thing about my education was that it was conceptual, but the chair of the department was really into process art and processes, so that like materials and processes and that sort of thing. So we did take a lot of technical courses, like whether it's a metal shop or bronze casting or mold making, fabrication, welding, woodwork, forge work. So we did a lot of that stuff. We weren't just sitting around, you know, sort of spouting off ideas. You know, he kept us busy with our hands. So we were making things. We weren't just sitting around talking.
Right.
But yeah, that education I think came back to help me because we did a lot of technical stuff that I could then draw upon later when I started doing the representation. So
Amazing.
um,
You
yeah,
know, Brian, one of
it's not.
the go ahead.
No, no, it's okay. Go ahead. I was going to say something else, but I saved it for later.
I just wanted to say before I forget, you know, one of the most inspiring things for me about the way that you've shared with me how you create your work or how it starts is where you get the inspiration from. Like I know you've mentioned to me before that you have dreams and visions. Can you tell us a little bit more about like how you're inspired to create a piece?
Yeah. Okay. So the I for me all the meaning comes from making. So it always begins with an interaction, particularly because I use a lot of live models when I work. So when I enter the studio with the model, especially new model, actually really any model, but especially somebody new, because I don't really know their character, I don't know their mannerisms, I don't know the way that they the way they stand, the way they gesture, the way they talk. So when I enter the studio in that with that person to start something new, I'm looking for clues from them, so that the inspiration comes from the activity of starting the sculpting with them. And a lot of times I'll get an idea in the midst of making it, but it's not complete. So for example, say the pose, there will be something compelling about a particular pose, right? And I don't really know what it is, but I know there's something there. And then the idea will sometimes come to me like a few weeks later. Like I said, like you said, or you mentioned, I have had dreams about sculptures,
Yeah.
pieces that I started, and the sculpture's in my dream, and the idea is complete. That's happened to me a lot. That's actually happened to me.
Is that what happened with the Ganges
That's
piece?
exactly what happened. That's
Okay.
exactly what happened. So the figure, because I had the self portrait bust, and I had the figure, and the figure was, I was just sort of flipping it around in different positions, and I had this sense that it should be upside down, and then I had a dream about it. It was like on my face, on my head. So that's
And
where
then
it
you
came.
had one of your students mention a story to you that was so similar to kind of what you had created, right?
Right. That's always to me the most surprising part is
Yeah.
when I realize that the imagery is connected to a narrative or to a myth or a character or some sort of cultural story or personal story of the person that's modeling, that I didn't conceive of. Right. So if that, for example, that piece where the female figure is upside down and her hair is sort of flowing over my face, like really long hair. Um, uh, a friend of mine, an Indian friend of mine, wrote to me after he saw the picture of it. And he said, "Hey, do you know the story of Shiva and the river Ganga?" And I was like, "No." So I looked it up, and it was uncannily similar to the story. My piece was uncannily similar. It's not precisely an interpretation, but it is uncannily similar. And the other thing that happened that I realized after I started composing the piece, this is an example of having maybe something bubbling up subconsciously, but the the way I posed it, the female figure is sort of landing on the forehead, and there's the story of the birth of, it was a birth of Athena
Yes.
from the forehead of Zeus, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't intentionally do that. It just, the imagery just coincided with those two narratives, those two myths. So I think that, even though those weren't the intention of the composition, the composition suggests those stories, and by suggesting them without illustrating them, it opens the door to other kinds of interpretations. And that's what I usually like. I like things that have that ambiguity built into them, but have a little bit of a hook of a narrative that you can get drawn into it with. So uh, those are good example. That's a good example of how the idea, the concept of it emerged from the act of doing it. And I think that's really important for artists. Like that, sometimes artists they want to dictate the terms of the process of making art from the beginning, and so they see it as a step-by-step process. They develop an idea, and then they visualize that idea in the medium. And I actually think it's the other way. For me, it's the other way around. That the idea emerges out of the act of making something.
Right,
And
because you'll be working on something and then halfway through you get an idea to just completely reconstruct it or change it, right?
yep, totally. Happens a lot. And sometimes I have to leave things for years. I mean, that sounds kind of crazy, but I do. I sometimes will start something and then leave it for a long, long time until I have an idea that fits with the composition of the piece. It's not always like that. Sometimes it happens really quickly within the first day of working with a model, or a few days after the model leaves, and the idea will come. So it's not. I think it's really important to leave that door open,
Mhm.
and whatever emerges out of the process is what you want to grab onto. Um, you're basically just throwing out your fishing line every day and like waiting for something to catch.
Right.
It's
And
like it is deep waters, right? All of that stuff is deep waters, and you're not a deep sea diver. You're not like that stuff. All those creatures are emerging from deep, deep down, right?
yes.
And
Absolutely.
you're there sort of waiting to catch them.
So, and another thing to mention too is that you work on many pieces at one time, right? Like, what would you say? Like, how many pieces are you working on right now, for example?
Yeah, that's now right now is kind of insane because the ideas are coming to me like faster than I can finish them.
Wow.
And the other thing is that I think COVID has really caused a little bit of a problem with that, because there's no, obviously money has been tight because of the nature of the situation we're in, but also like being in isolation too much makes me just like what I keep doing is I just keep starting new sculptures because I don't know where they're going. And so I think right now, this is going to sound crazy, but I think I have 27 unfinished pieces in my studio. And that's not counting the pieces that need to be cast in bronze. I think I have 7 pieces that are finished and ready to be cast in bronze. So that makes like 34 pieces. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So
That's too much. It's too much. I need to finish some of these.
I would go crazy. I only work on one piece at one time usually. I mean, there's been times, even recently, that I've been working on a few pieces at once, but 34 pieces, Brian, I would go absolutely insane.
It's too much. I mean, here's the thing though, like here's part of it. This is actually a big part of why they're stacking up like this. Normally, prior to this year, I would have a studio assistant that would be helping me complete things.
Right.
So like making molds, making waxes for bronze casting, helping with the finishing, and I'd just be paying them to do that kind of production end work. And this year I haven't had that help. So
Mhm.
um
Due to
so I'm
COVID?
doing everything myself. Yeah, mostly, yeah, because of COVID and the financial situation that's put me
Yeah.
in. It's not so much. I mean, I just don't. I don't want to be spending money on production at this particular time. So what it means is that I'm doing a lot of the practical parts of the process that I wouldn't normally be doing, and that slowed down the rate at which I could finish things. So
Right.
it's really a combination of factors. Um, and the other thing is that I sculpt really fast, pretty fast, the figure. So when I have a model, I can get the basics of a figure down within a few sessions. And then what that means is I just keep producing, I just keep like adding more pieces to the studio
Okay.
and not finishing them, but
So that's kind
they'll
of
get
cool.
done.
So you would need, so let's say you would need like 3 sessions with the model in order to get like a good, like one solid piece down. Is that how it, usually ends up being?
It, well, it varies. It varies. It depends on the scale, obviously.
Right.
So if it's small, it's a tiny piece. If it's a very small piece, I can get enough information in three sessions. Um, it's better to have more, just because it's a little, you don't have, you can pace yourself a little bit better, and you can like let the thing emerge a little more leisurely pace,
Mhm.
instead of rushing to get information. But I don't always have that luxury, because where I live, I don't really have models here that I use regularly. I usually have to hire somebody from New York or whatever. They'll come in for a short time and pay them to pose for me, and then they go. But I like to have more. I think if I could have 5 sessions, that's the ideal.
That's
Like
ideal.
5 or 6 is perfect. Yeah, that's ideal. But I don't always have that luxury. Sometimes, a lot of art models. Now they're not really doing this because of COVID, but a lot of art models will travel around. They'll do tours of like areas, and they'll just contact like Instagram or Facebook. They'll contact people and say, "Hey, I'm going to be traveling through. Do you need an art model for drawing or painting or sculpture?" And so I've connected with a
Oh, I didn't know that they did that.
There are a lot of them. Yeah, there are a lot of them to do that. Yeah, yeah, and
Pretty
they're of course working for photographers and all kinds of people.
right.
But
Yes. Yeah, I've met a couple
yeah.
people doing that. That's so cool. That's really, really cool. So what is the largest piece that you've produced?
Well, the largest of my work was life size. I have worked for like I was assistant to Audrey Flack for many years, and uh, I worked on some big projects for her, like 10 foot, 12 foot, 15 foot figures. Even larger than that, she had a big piece that was like 35 feet tall that I worked on. Um, and then I worked on that Da Vinci horse project, which was 25 foot equestrian horse. But I was an assistant on those projects. Those weren't my projects. Those were, I was a hired hand to help finish them. Um, But my own work, so far the largest I've done is life size. I would like to do larger though. I mean, I would love to do something really
Yeah.
big,
And we were talking
and I will.
another day, we were talking about how expensive it is to ship your work too, right? Because, bronze is so darn heavy.
It's heavy.
And it's so delicate because you got arms and legs, and it's got to be packed in an appropriate way, right?
Yeah, yeah, it can be very expensive to ship. If it's large, obviously. If it's smaller, it's not so bad. But large pieces can be expensive to ship. Uh, but that's true for any. I mean, if you made a really large painting and you had to crate it, that's not cheap either.
I've done that. I've done that. It's very
Yeah,
expensive. It can get very,
yeah,
very
it can cost.
expensive.
Yeah, but that's not really the barrier for me. The shipping, is if somebody was interested in it, they'd be paying for it.
Oh,
The
100.
real barrier, yeah, the real barrier for me in terms of scale is my production end, and just having the time and resource to do it. That's
Yeah, like maybe if you were commissioned for that piece, why not, right? I mean, you've already
exactly.
paid for it. That's how I feel too about the big piece that I created that took me a year out of my life. It was like, if I'm going to approach that again, I'll probably need to be commissioned for a piece that size.
Yeah, exactly. Because it does dominate your life once you start doing pieces that large. Even life-size pieces are a lot of work, and so I've been doing mostly. I would say the average piece now is half scale, like 1/3 to half scale, 1/3 to half height, I should say.
Right.
Uh, that's probably the most typical scale. I really like that scale because, especially half scale, because I can it's a big enough object that it has presence in the room, but
Mhm.
I can also sculpt it relatively quickly. I'm not putting aside a commitment of time that would slow down my overall production. And because the other thing is that with sculpture, if I have done this where if you make something that's smaller, say 1/3 scale or half scale, if there's a demand for it and people really like it, you can always enlarge it,
Right.
right? And I have done that before with pieces that were started off as a half scale piece and then made a larger version. So
Would you call
it's
that
just more.
study? Like, would that be like a kind of a smaller study, even though, I mean, it's a finalized piece, but like, is that kind of like a sculptor's study?
Well, for me, they're always well. Okay, yeah, that's a good question because it can be either way. Actually, I've done it both ways. I have done sometimes I do things that are I start with a study, and then I'll enlarge that and then make a finished version. But there have been times when I've made a completely finished smaller piece. This not wasn't really intended as a study for something larger, but then sort of toward the end of the process became obvious that it could be a larger piece, and therefore enlarged it from there without starting with that intention.
Mhm.
But I do sometimes start like a piece as a study, usually like maybe about that big, quarter scale, quarter or third scale, and in that case, if I know it's going to be just a study and a way to work out the composition and proportions, then I won't finish it. I'll just leave it. It's kind of rough and basic, but I don't do that often actually,
Okay.
surprisingly. Yeah.
Do you remember, Brian, what your very first sculpture looked like?
Yeah, I do. I actually have it in my studio.
Do
I
you-
have it in my studio.
What is it? What is it of?
It's a portrait bust of a friend of mine, and
Okay.
and she sat for me. It seems like when I look back on it now, it seems like I worked on that thing forever, but it probably wasn't that long. Um, Nobody was teaching me how to do it. I just kind of did it on my own. But I do have it. And the funny thing is, I sold that years later after I graduated from university, and I'd been teaching for a while. I made a bronze of it. I had made a bronze of that piece. That was my first bronze, actually. My first portrait, or my first representational sculpture, and my first bronze. And I ended up selling it many years later. Uh, so it must have been good, I guess. But yeah, that's my first one. And then the first figure I did, I'm trying to think now. It's hard to remember this stuff. I feel like I'm getting old. I can't remember.
No.
Oh, the first figure I did was just a torso. It was a torso study. It was a life-size torso study. I used myself as the model. And that, I don't know where that is because I sold that when I was in university. The director of the museum at Penn State bought it, and I don't. So Karin Arbertman, if you're out there and you're listening to this, get in touch with me because I'd like to know where that piece is.
That's cool.
Yeah, but
Oh my gosh.
yeah.
What's one piece of advice that you would give to somebody who's just beginning their art career, or more specifically, a career in sculpting?
It's hard to think of one piece of advice.
Any advice that comes to mind?
I would say I would say that first is that you have to, I mean, you have to be engaged with your art on a daily basis. Like, and I don't mean that you have to be making art every day, but you need to be doing something for it every day. You need to be engaged with it on a daily basis, even if it's just reading a book about, art history or the history of the genre that you're interested in, or if it's cleaning your studio or cleaning your brushes or whatever it is. I just of daily engagement with your art, and because it requires a kind of commitment that I think very few occupations require. You know this. I mean,
Absolutely.
and because the other thing is you can't. In other words, here's another way of putting it: you can't wait for the feeling to be there to be making to make things. You have to be. You're more of a channel and a vessel than you are the driver of it. And if you're not, like, the muses are basically looking for willing accomplices, right?
Yes.
Right.
So
They're
true.
looking.
I
Yeah.
absolutely agree with that. It's something that it does require your full attention. And and I've said this before, you have to almost create the inspiration, and just sitting there reading the book, researching, even if you're not painting or sculpting, or if you're not washing your brushes, things come to you when you're constantly engaged in your craft in some way, right? Ideas come to you, inspirations come to you as you're sitting there doing the work.
Yep.
So I think that's really, really important that you mentioned that.
Yeah. The other thing I would say, the other piece of advice, see, this is why it's hard to give one piece of advice for
No,
somebody
it's
beginning.
fine. Give as much
I'll give
advice as
lots,
you like.
I'll just throw out lots of advice and people can pick and choose the advice that seems applicable to them.
That's perfect. Yeah.
But the other thing I would say is that you need to be engaging with people in the community of art making and making connections and reaching out to people. I would like, especially for sculptors, I highly recommend for anybody who's an aspiring sculptor, and not just representational sculptor. You can be any kind of sculptor. It's really important um, to seek out people that you can either apprentice with or take a course with, and like try to meet as many people in the field and engage with them and learn from them, not just in a classroom environment, but in their actual studio.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a lot of valuable information that can be gleaned from interacting with an artist in their working environment. And sculptors always need help. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do the same kind of work. Like my current assistant, she does like mostly found object sculpture, like she assemblages found objects and that kind of thing. So she doesn't even do representational work, but she helps me in the studio, and um, I think it's been beneficial to her. I know for me it was very beneficial to work for Audrey Flack when I started out, just to get a sense of the way in which the art world operates, what it's like to run a studio, all of that. How to interact with a foundry, um, and that's been very valuable for my career.
Yeah.
And so I would say, that's the other piece of advice: is try to find people whose work you admire or find interesting in some way, and reach out to them. See if you can maybe, if they need any help working. I mean, sweep the floors, even if you could just sweep the floors in your studio, like
Right.
anything you can do to be in contact with those people. I think because as you know, the art world is all about these kinds of relationships that you build, right? That's what it is.
Right. And you're also gaining so much inspiration from those people. And I like the saying, water seeks its own level. Like, if you want to be, if you want to be in a certain circle, then you have to reach out to those people, and you have to, create those relationships and those friendships, and you gain so much knowledge and so much inspiration from being around people that can understand you and that can help you in your progression of your art and just you as a human being, right? Because and it's this way in everything you do in life. Like, you want to get around the people who can understand you and help develop you.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. I think that's so important, that and the thing is, right now it's so easy to do because of Instagram.
Right.
When I was starting out, it was like I didn't even know how to meet people. First of all, I was really shy. I didn't like talking, so that's changed a little bit now.
That's changed. Yeah, that's changed.
Quite as shy anymore, but it can be intimidating too. But I always would tell people, like, you don't have anything to lose. The worst they can say is no, I don't have time for you. You just move on to somebody else and see what you can find in terms of interaction. But one of the things about being an artist is it requires a certain amount of solitude. It's a very isolating experience sometimes. And uh, when COVID lockdown first happened, all these artists were saying, "Oh, this is just like my regular life," and I'm thinking, "No, it's not. This isn't like regular life," because I like going to openings in New York, gallery openings, and seeing my artist friends, seeing what's going on in the art world there. And I have artist friends that live near me. I have a bunch of painter friends that live 15 miles up the road, and getting together with them and talking about what we're doing is so important. I can't just if I'm in my own head in my studio all the time, then I'm not really bouncing anything off of another intellect, right? And I think that's very important to develop that community.
And that's where art comes from too, in a way, right? It comes from those reactions. It comes from your experience of life, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
like, I know you're very much like myself. You really you love your introverted work and you love your time in the studio, but you're also very social like me, right? And we like to get out, we like to have those inspiring conversations. Like, how many times have we talked about poetry and Greek mythology, and like, it's important to have those connections and that communication.
Definitely. And I think the other thing is that we kind of uh, operate under this assumption that we are the ones who know what our work is about, and that what meaning is there. But it's very easy to miss things that are going on in your work that uh, that are apparent to other people. And if those other people aren't seeing it and responding to it, might not be seeing it yourself. Now, I do think it's one of the reasons I like working with models is because at least it gives me a person in the room to respond to what I'm doing. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Um, but yeah, it can be that's not good. You need to have those interactions. Now, having said that, I think it's like an important qualifier, which is that, and this is another piece of advice for somebody who's just beginning. Uh, don't I don't think it's wise to abdicate your process to anybody else. I was a professor for 10 years in a fine arts program, and of course, one of the tried and true traditions. Well, I don't know how well tried it is, um, but one of the traditions is, of course, doing critiques, like group critiques of people's work,
Right.
and a natural tendency that people have in that kind of uh, forum is that the people giving the critique they're responding to the artwork in a way that they're conditioned to respond to their own work. So they're always going to see it. Well, I shouldn't say always, because if you make a conscious effort, you don't do this. But typically, what will happen is they're telling the person to do things that they would do if it was their artwork, right? And
Like
that's
in
just a
life.
human tendency that we have.
Right.
And
That's like in life we do that.
right, right. Right, exactly. We do that all the time. I mean, everybody's like judging other people based on their own experience. So they say, well, if that was my life, I would do it this way. Well, so here's a piece of advice for anybody who's starting out, and especially if they're in art school. Don't let anybody tell you what to do.
Number
Do
one piece of
your thing.
advice right there.
Do your thing. Don't let anybody tell you what to do. You have to do your thing. The worst version of your art is always going to be better than somebody else doing a version of your art, right?
True.
So, because it's yours. And so if you abdicate that because of that environment, then you're giving up a part of yourself that you shouldn't give up. But that's not the same as taking the insights of other people and incorporating them, right? Just don't.
Constructive criticism, you know, even like you can't be afraid of that if you're an artist, right? You need to be able to handle constructive criticism, and sometimes, you know, what you're hearing is much needed and can help you.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, look, it's none of us like that process. I don't think. I mean, we're all sensitive, and I think it's normal to have a a personal attachment to what you do, and it can sometimes hurt to get the criticism, but it's going to happen. So you just have to toughen up in a way and accept it. And nobody likes it. I don't think anybody like enjoys that experience, but it's just the nature of being an artist.
Right.
But that gets back to what I was saying just a minute ago, which is you have to believe in yourself. You have to do the thing that you feel deep down is your purpose in life,
Yes.
in your artwork.
100%. And how many of the greatest artists you think they really, you know, listen to other people like Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo? I mean, I know Michelangelo had commissions and things to do for churches and whatnot, but like you really think that they, you know, Leonardo was going to listen to the next man tell him what to do artistically?
Yeah, can you imagine Michelangelo in an MFA program? He would be like, he'd be the most grumpy, discontented art student of all time.
Oh
Right?
my
He wouldn't even
goodness.
let the Pope tell him what to do. He was so, but no, granted, there are market forces. I mean, we're never going to be we're never going to be purely free to do what we want. Like, like Michelangelo had this dream of literally carving the side of a mountain, right? In Tuscany, right? He had this idea that he was going to carve this gigantic figure out of the marble mountain, and leave it in the mountain. Yeah. There's a limit to what we can do, physical limit, monetary limit. Like there is some limit, but
Who knows?
don't let the
Maybe he
limit
could have.
be something.
Maybe he could have if it was a different
Yeah,
time.
he could have. In a different time, yeah, in a different time, he definitely could have. But the point is that those are limits they're just the limits of being human, right? Those are things that we all have to contend with, and those kinds of limits can feel frustrating, but they're also freeing because they tell you what you can and can't do within the framework of physical possibility. But that's not the same as somebody telling you it's not, you can't sculpt, a figure, you can't do that, you can't, whatever it might be. um, that's not really up to anybody else but you. And I think that it's for me it was hard because when I first started out, because I didn't know, once I graduated from school, I didn't know what to do with my work. I felt really confused by it. I felt like there was no place for me. Now that was all in my head, right? That was not something that was nobody forced me to think that way. I just took upon myself all of the criticisms and made them personal. And that's, something that took some maturity for me to get over and just start to recognize the value of what it is that I do.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's not valuable to everybody.
Do you ever have doubts even today, like about, you know, the value of what you're creating and doing?
No, I don't. So I don't have doubts about the I don't have doubts about being an artist. I don't have doubts about what it is I'm attempting to do. I do. I'm human, so I have doubts about my future, right?
Mm-hmm.
I do sometimes. I worry too much. I think too much.
We've talked about this before.
We have talked about this before. I overthink things. I worry too much. I I I I need to. There's a part of my brain that's hard to turn off, especially because I'm here alone a lot, and so going to bed at night, it's like it churns in my head.
I'm finding
But
the Brian into meditation.
yeah, I know. I need meditation is something that needs to be more regular, needs to be consistent. But on the other hand, there I'm not Pollyannish, right? I don't. It's not like I just think everything's gonna come to me easy and it's just gonna happen. I
Mhm.
work hard. I'll work as hard as I have to work to do what I want to do. I won't. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of that. I'm not afraid of putting everything out there and taking chances and working
Mhm.
hard. Um, Look,
Looking back
the
on your,
reality is, go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, looking back on your career thus far, like, is there anything that you feel you would have done differently, or like that you would have told your younger self?
Yeah, for sure. There's a
Mhm.
lot of things I would have told my younger self. First thing I would have said is, don't be so damn hard on yourself.
Yeah, that's a
I
good one.
was so hard on myself. I have very few pieces from my early years of sculpting the figure because I would destroy them. I destroyed so many things. I would get so frustrated, and I would have I would have told myself, to not be so hard. Just be patient, and it'll all be okay. I mean, I still tell myself that now today. So,
Right.
so, so I would have certainly told my younger self that. I probably would have also, if I could go way back and look at my younger, like my teenage self, I would have, I would have told myself that I had a lot of talent because when I was in like I said, by the time I got to high school art teacher really was not very engaged and not didn't help, wasn't encouraging. But when I look at my drawings from my teen years, it's pretty obvious what I was meant to do.
You had
I mean,
talent. You had talent.
yeah, you can see it. I mean, I can see it now, especially because I've been teaching for so long, and I can assess that in people pretty quickly. But yeah, I would just the main thing is I would have told myself, don't be so hard on yourself. Like lighten up a little bit.
Isn't
Just
that
lighten up.
crazy how we're like our own worst enemies? Like, we
Yeah,
get in our own way.
yeah, that is absolutely true. I mean, I can't really look. I can't speak for anybody else, but what you just said is really true. I can be my own worst enemy. Although I've had some pretty like nasty real enemies too. So
Well, you're bound to, come across one or two of those on your life's journey, and the higher that you rise up, there's going to be people who love you and there's going to be people that don't love you and want to maybe take from you or see you fail, you know what I mean? But that's just, you just got to keep rising, because as you rise, you give permission for other people to do the same, and that's the important thing about living.
right, and yeah, that's true. And you can't expect everybody to love the work that you do, and that's just not realistic. That
No.
it's there are some people going to love it. There are some people going to be indifferent, and there's some people who are going to hate it, right?
Right.
And that that's the way it is. That's the reality of life. And the other thing is that you're not all of your work is going to be a perfect representation of your capabilities. And there are going to be big ideas and there are going to be smaller ones, but you have to do them all. You have to just give them all their space. And
Mhm.
there are some pieces you look at and you're like, oh, I really that one really somehow came out better than anything I've done before. And
But I also have done pieces that I just thought were crap, and then everybody loves it. Like,
yeah,
I hate when
yeah,
that happens.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's a very strange thing. Like that's it's really important you say that. That's kind of what I said about like don't be so hard on yourself with people that are starting out. That we're extending that one question into I'm
All the
extrapolating things from our conversation to include in an answer to that question. But you know you have to the things that you think are good and bad are not always the things that are going to endure. So, and I've had that experience where I had like a solo show, and there's one piece that I remember specifically. There was one show. There was one piece that I just thought was too weird. Like I was like, nobody's gonna like this, and it was the first piece that sold. So go figure.
There
Yeah.
you go. There you go. So
But
Brian, I also want to mention that you have a really nice collection of books. So anybody who wants to rate a bookshelf, it would be Brian's bookshelf, because I swear every book that I have mentioned to you that isn't even art related, he has a copy of already. So whether it be poetry or, spirituality, art, philosophy, he's got it on his bookshelf. So I know that books are really inspiring for you, but what else do you like to look at? What kind of art do you like to look at that inspires you?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. Because we that gets back to this early part of our conversation here, which is you were asked about what inspires. And I didn't mention that about reading. Reading has really been an important aspect of my artistic practice, because I feel like your engagement as an artist has to be beyond your own studio. It has to be into the minds of other people, and
Mhm.
books are the greatest way to journey without packing a suitcase. So you can you can explore ideas that would never necessarily occur to you by reading. But I do look at a lot of art, and I have a lot of art books. Uh, and I think the assumption would be, of course, that because I do representational sculpture, that I have a lot of, like, all my books are about representational sculpture, but they're not. I have lots of books on painting, installation art. There are so many things that inspire me, and I think as an artist, your job is to be out there as a willing participant for the muses that want to speak through you. It's not your job to dictate to the universe what it needs to hear. It's your job is to be receptive. And so I like to look at lots of different kinds of art. I know that's a very uh, unhelpful answer, because like people want
It's
something
not
specific.
though.
People want something specific, like what inspires you. And I go, oh, I mean, there could be obvious things like, oh, Rodin inspires me. Well, that's kind of obvious, because he's like one of the most famous sculptors in human history.
Yeah.
But so that's an obvious answer. But it could be like I listen to a lot of music, and music can inspire me. Sometimes it's a lot of poetry. I read a lot of poetry, and that inspires me. Part of the reason is because I think that poetry um, poetry feels very akin to what I'm doing when I'm sculpting. Uh, like I There's that quote by Bob Dylan where he said, um, a, "A poem is a naked man," right?
Mhm.
Where
I love that.
basically, yeah, it's really good. I can't remember which album, like, insert that's in, but um, I do think there's an analogy between the two, because art, particularly sculpture doesn't narrate in the way that, say, a painting would narrate, or a novel would narrate, or or some sort of a play or a film would narrate. So sculpture is a more evocative art form, where it may tell a part of a story, but it's evoking more about the psychological presence of the person. Okay. And so poetry always feels to me more like an evocative art form, and less of a narrative art form, at least short form poetry. uh, Obviously, the longer poems can be narrative in scope, um, but I so that really is very useful for me to sort of relax my mind, and allow myself to not feel the pressure of developing concepts. You should. I think that's a really important thing for me, is to when I engage with other art forms, I'm not thinking about inspiration, right? I'm not. In other words, the inspiration isn't coming to me by some sort of force of will, right? I'm not like listening to Mahler. Like, Mahler's my favorite composer. We
Yeah.
talked about Mahler. We talked about Mahler. Like, Mahler's my favorite composer, and it's been inspirational to me, both in terms of his life and how he lived as a human being, and his devotion to his art, and how he struggled through so many different things, and survived and thrived as an artist. So that's all inspirational, but I'm not, like, as I'm listening to it, I'm not consciously trying to pull out of that experience some sort of direct correlative between the thing that I'm working on and that inspirational experience, right? You know what I'm saying?
Well,
It's
yeah,
more like when
it comes
yeah,
back to
when I
what
go
we
and
were saying before, right? What we were saying before about inspiration and how, just engaging with your work and, you're in the studio, you're listening to music, but you're not intentionally trying to like gain inspiration. It just comes to you from being there and doing the work.
yep. Yeah, this might be why that's really yeah, that might be why I'm so addicted to art making because in every other part of my life, I I'm like I said, I think too much. I worry too much. I in every other part of my life, I'm I'm really trying to force the thought into some like some sort of solution to the whatever problem I'm dealing with in life. But in art, I don't do that. For whatever reason, I've been able to train myself when I'm making art to just relax and let the idea emerge. I don't try to force it. I just let that experience that I'm having inform what I'm doing without any overthought or stress or worry. And so it's kind of addictive to me because it's the one place where I can go to escape everything. Like I'm a real procrastinator. And by that, I'm not talking about my artwork. I never procrastinate making art. I procrastinate everything else by making art. like if I have emails to write and my studio is so close to every other part of my life. It's right here. So if there's something else occupying my mind, I'm like, maybe I'll just go in there and sculpt a little bit, and then everything else disappears, which isn't, practical, but
But you see how, everything that you're doing, whether it be the poetry or Mahler, listening to Mahler or sculpting, these are all things that interest you. And while you're doing the things that are interesting to you, inspiration comes. And like, isn't that a really strong point for people to recognize is that,
yeah,
your path doesn't come from forcing.
right.
It comes from doing the things that feel almost like a meditation to you, that feel good for you. And then, magic is created from that space. I think that that's what, not just people in the art world need to hear, but everybody in the world needs to hear. In today's day and age, it's not about forcing to have money or a title or
Right.
some sort of recognition. It's about being in that comfortable space. I mean, sometimes you need uncomfort to grow and to build muscle, right? But you want to do what feels natural to you and use your talents, and then, who knows what's going to come from that space.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's exactly right. You like you said, there is, in a way you could say there is no path. You're making the path. You're just going where things are leading, and um, you can't you can't force everything. You have to be your mind has to be relaxed and ready and willing. Even in, like you said, even the stressful, difficult times, the times that are painful can be used. Everything can be used as potential fuel for the fire of creativity. It all can be used. It's really a matter of mindset and whether you can see it from that point of view, from that perspective.
Mhm.
Uh, it's like that was one of my favorites, like sculpture metaphors. Sculpture is three-dimensional, and if you're looking at one side, you're only seeing a small portion of it. You have to look at life from all those different sides, and then the inspiration will just come. But
Yes, that's so
I don't know
inspiring.
how we got on that.
No, I love that idea because, I can really, I can use that and use it for every part of my life. Like if I'm looking at a situation, okay, like, can I just change my perspective a little bit? What else can I get from it, from looking at it
Right.
in this way?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's all about changing perspective. And that's what inspiration is in a way. It's just looking at your experience and the things that you're interested in from a different point of view, right? And when you see that different point of view, it can open your mind up to something you hadn't preconceived. Uh, and that's, again, it's hard to do because as you know, when you start a painting, you're in it for the long haul with work. Like, it's a lot of work. And so the tendency that people have is to want to know that it's all going to be okay at the beginning. right, with the work, right? They don't want to. They're like, okay, this is going to be weeks and weeks of work. So is this going to be worth it? Like, but that's not how it happens. It happens by just engaging with it, and then as you engage with it, it'll emerge. It'll turn into something.
Right.
Whether what your expectation is or not isn't really important.
You know, I think when you're creating from that space of inspiration,
Mhm.
like what draws you to create a piece and work on it for years, or me to create a painting for 1 year total, right, is I think that that's what makes real art special, you know, because it comes from a place that is authentic and
Yeah,
not forced.
yeah, yeah. That's true. I think you can sense it in work. You can sense it when the content, the material is a hard one, right? You can sense it when somebody really put in the effort of work and thought, and it could be any genre. It doesn't matter like what it is. You can tell when somebody uh, has created for themselves an environment that allows them to fully explore the depths of an idea.
Yeah. And I
And
want to say too that, you know, and I don't know, I've been reading a lot about Rothko lately because I'm just called to Rothko. But you know, you would look at something like his work and think, okay, a red square or a black square, like so simplistic. Oh, that's quick. But no, like I actually think Rothko stood for hours in front of his paintings
oh,
and
I totally agree.
contemplated what was going on and what he was feeling and what he was doing, right? And there was a time back when I was in university that I would laugh at art like that, like I didn't take it really seriously, but it wasn't until shortly after university that I started really being called to also abstract work. So when you were saying about you look at all different types of art, I'm the exact same way. I'm inspired by many different types of art now, and I realize that when it's that true authentic art, you just feel it and you just recognize it and you see it, and it's
Right.
yeah, it's a powerful experience.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think another thing we could say about that is that, and I mentioned this earlier, that how the we tend to try to categorize things so much that we like, okay, there's this kind of work and this kind of work and they're all different. But in a certain sense, like even using the word abstract is kind of misleading, because in a certain sense everything that we do artistically is an abstraction.
That's so true.
It,
Yeah.
it's all an abstraction. It's not like when I make a figure sculpture, it's not the thing. It's not the literal person. I'm not cloning them, genetically cloning them, right? I'm representing them in a different way. It's an abstraction of an experience that I
Mhm.
have in the studio with a person, and 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 it's an abstraction of a physical living being into an immobile, uh, permanent material, right,
Mhm.
or semi-permanent material. Nothing's really permanent, but uh, that's an abstraction. And so, if you can think of it that way, then it allows you to not be constrained by the by the preconception of what makes something good or bad, right? Like in other words, like does it have to look exactly like the model that I'm using, or is the model just a source for something else, right? Uh, and of course everybody lands at a different point in that spectrum of abstraction, right? It's like there's obviously a range there. But yeah, I agree with you, like the Rothko thing. I always liked Rothko though. I don't know, there's something I always got it, like it always felt to me like this noumenal thing, like it was just the being, this singular being kind of experience.
Yes, I was
That's
looking
very critical.
online. I was looking online at the pieces that he had commissioned for the church. Is it
Yep.
in Chicago? I forget what city it's in.
Rothko Chapel. Which city is it, Rothko Chapel in? Well, we'll get somebody commenting on that to remind
Yeah, we'll get
us.
somebody commenting. I can't remember, but I remember looking at the picture and I was just staring at it. I was like, oh, I need to visit this place and I need to go sit on that bench and just meditate in front of these pieces. I just feel so drawn
Yeah.
to Rothko.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
it's a very, I mean, Rothko, James Turrell, I mean, these guys, and Anish Kapoor, I put in a similar category. They're dealing with large ideas, right? They're dealing with very, very large ideas of what being is and what experience is in the presence of the concept of being versus our experience, which is as mutable creatures. We don't, we're not unchanging, immovable. We're not the prime mover. We're dependent, mutable creatures, and so those artworks put us in the presence of the idea of something beyond our physical constraints of living. It's very, very much in the sort of Platonic tradition of art making. Uh, and it's a very powerful thing. Yeah, I've actually never been to the Rothko Chapel. Isn't it in Fort Worth, Texas? I could be wrong.
It could be
I got
Texas. It could be Texas. I can't remember, but somebody's going to comment for sure. But I just like, you know, feeling a person's soul through their work and how powerful that is. And I just want to encourage artists out there to work from that space, not work from the space of, oh, is it going to sell, or oh, are they going to like it? You have to
yeah.
work from that space that's true to who you are inside, because that's what the world needs more of, don't you think?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think that it's not just economic forces that are driving people's considerations of what to make. It's also all kinds of political considerations. I mean, it's a, we're in a very interesting time where, on the one hand, as an artist, it's wide open what you can do. We don't live in a time when if you didn't have a commission from the church or from the state, you weren't surviving as an artist. We don't live in that time anymore. It's really kind of remarkable that it's where we live in a time where an average person who's even actually make artwork that can be seen by lots of people, and that's a new phenomenon. But it also is, so on the one hand there's that sort of freedom, but on the other hand there's a lot of there's a real uh, deep and complicated cultural battle that we're undergoing, that is dictating what can and can't be done. And um, and I don't think that's where artists should be thinking. I think artists should be thinking wide open about what they can talk about in their work.
Hmm.
And I don't think, I don't think it's all about beauty. Sometimes it's about there are things about life that are very difficult and ugly, and some people need to represent those. It doesn't have to be me, or it doesn't have to be you, but I want people out there doing the full range of human experience that
Yes.
they're inquiring about.
Yeah.
So
I've always said, that for me, I create from beauty. Like that's what's most important for me. And that's, a lot of my pain and my suffering is transmuted into my work, but it comes out in a very beautiful way. But I also know and encourage other artists to create what comes out of them, whether it be something, maybe a little bit more grotesque or crazy. It's you. So I think every person should be creating what they have, like your canvas or your sculpting. It's your diary, like let it out.
yeah, yeah, I think that's true, and I think we have to get beyond that idea that as artists we're somehow responsible for solving problems. We don't. That's not what we're here for. That's not we're and we're not here to speak on behalf of anybody else. Like I don't even really see myself as speaking on behalf of myself in a way. I'm doing is speaking about what it means to be human in one very narrow way, right? Like this is like what I'm doing is one slice of human experience, and you're depicting another slice, which is the way that
Right.
the humans perceive the physical world, the world of nature outside of
Yes.
human culture. And we all have a part to play in depicting the various aspects of human experience. And I don't think artists are. we're not poets. We're not. I mean, we're not prophets. We're not priests. We're poets.
Yeah.
You know, that's what we are. We're poets. We're not. We're that's what we do. And uh, but I think there's a real sense that if your work right now it doesn't have the right political message or right message, that it's not, you know, it's not taken seriously. And
Yeah.
I mean, obviously that's not that's a broad generalization to say that, because that's not the entire art world, right? There's just an aspect of that that's another force that people can be overly sensitive to. Just do your I think you're right, just do your thing, whatever it is in you that you feel is waiting to come out. You know, if
Hmm.
you're open to it, it'll find an exit point. But I don't know. I do worry about that sometimes, because partly because I do figures, and they're nudes, almost all nudes, right? And so it's just like people have all kinds of preconceptions about that, right?
Hmm.
And a lot of them negative, a lot of negative preconceptions about the nude in art. And uh, but ultimately I can't think about that. I just have to do I'm going to keep doing what I do. I'm stubborn. I'm going to do what I do.
Good, good. I mean, when you say that they have, those opinions, are these people who are involved in the art world, or just like the random on Instagram? Uh,
Both. It's
both.
both. Yeah, it's both. It's both. Look, everybody has preferences for what they like, but the nude does have the nude is a very hot topic to utilize in art, because whether it's somebody on one end of the spectrum who finds it like that kind of depiction somewhat immoral,
Mm.
or on the other end of the spectrum where they think that there's kind of a form of objectification involved in doing that. And you know, both of those are negative views that I just ignore, because I don't know, that's not, none of that is the point that I'm
You have to, because like you have to know your intention. And so this kind of leads into my next question is, um, with your intention for your work, like what is it that you really are trying to say with your work? What do you think it is? What do you think your mission is, and the statement behind your work?
Yeah, okay. I have a couple lines of inquiry that I follow in my work. I guess a way to distill it down to simplify the answer is to say that I'm interested in the way in which we as human beings communicate our internal states through our bodies, and the ways in which we interact with the other as as a as a viewer of the world, and interact with ourselves and externalize ourselves in the way we see other people. Okay, so that, for example, if I'm a male and looking at a female form, right? The in the past that was done as a sort of voyeuristic act, right? So that it was so that the what was important was the the viewer's point of view. And I'm interested in making the object, or the personality that's being represented, an active participant in the psychological interaction between the viewer and it. Okay, uh, so that it's not simply an act of looking, but looking is an act of communication,
Mm.
right? Not an act of possession, but an act of communication. So um, that's, that's one way I would put it. There's more to it than that, but I think that the there's a lot that hasn't been explored with representing the human form in sculpture. And that particular, I'm a product of my age, right? So I'm a product of things that didn't exist before, like political rights that didn't exist before for women prior to this age. Um, the ways in which we don't have common narratives now about human nature, right? So in a pre-modern time, anywhere in Europe, there would be a consistent view of what human nature was. It was, preached by primarily the church, right? There was a sort of philosophical grounding that people accepted about what human nature is. And now we're in a place where a lot of those narratives have broken down, but they're still there under the surface. They're still sort of underlying everything we do. And so I'm really interested in the ways in which, as contemporary humans, we are still at heart, in these deep way, primitive creatures, right? We're primal. I don't, since human beings started making art 45,000 years ago, we haven't really evolved beyond those basic needs and urges and feelings that we have as humans.
Mm-hmm.
We have lots of ways of covering it up. We have lots of ways of hiding it. We have lots of ways of pretending that we're beyond all of that, but we're not. We're still connected to those primal urges that are at the prehistoric age. So I really I think a lot of my favorite work is like that early primitive stuff. I think it's so powerful because they're tapping into something very deep there and very mysterious. So uh, I'm hoping that I'm doing that in my work. It's hard for me to assess whether that's actually successfully being communicated, but I am interested in that. And um, I think off in a very we're very much strangers to ourselves sometimes, right? We think we know ourselves when we don't that well.
We're
And
constantly discovering, right? I mean,
yeah,
this path is not it's not like you finally get somewhere and then that's it. It's like a constant
yep,
discovery of self, right? At
yep,
least for those who want to delve in and want to seek,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And we in many ways we're very malleable creatures, and we do have a core to us that we inherited through our evolution as a species, and we're connected to other beings in that core nature. But on the other hand, we also live in an age where we're preached to all the time that you get to decide what you are. You get to choose. How you're addressed as a person, which is all great, except that what do you do if you find that that's not working for you? Do you just change it again? And how do you then express yourself in this new form that you've decided to take? I do find that idea very interesting and compelling. This sort of um, uh, ability for us to redefine who we are, what we do, and
And
our
reinvent ourselves,
and
and I think
reinvent ourselves.
as an artist too, like what do you think about that? Like the reinventing of self.
Yeah. Well, this is okay. So one of the reasons I started doing all these self portraits because that very question was impossible for me to answer because I don't know that the self is even a thing.
Hmm.
Like maybe the self is a construct that we all have to have in our minds in order for things to make sense, right?
I
But the self
totally
is
get what you're
this.
saying. I feel like it's again one of those boxes that we put ourselves in. Like maybe is that what you're
Yeah,
saying? Like maybe
yeah,
that self, the idea of self is like, oh, I thought I was this, but like now I'm actually this. It's like, well, maybe it's because you were putting yourself in a box and now you're exploring more of who you are.
yeah.
Not a new you, but more.
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly. Like maybe the self isn't really even a thing. Maybe we don't like the self is just a construct that we have in our head in order to feel some sort of stability and consistency
Yeah.
in experience in an experience in life which is constantly changing, constantly surprising us, constantly full uh, of occurrences that are out of our control, right? I mean, even like sometimes we don't even know why we do the things that we do, right? So I'm always fascinated by this in contemporary conversation where people talk as if it's simply a matter of our choice to decide who we want to be, but in reality, there's some other force guiding us that we don't have control over. And I like the idea that I'm both my own best friend and my biggest stranger, right? I just like there's things about myself that I still don't understand, and I'm still trying to work out, and hopefully art is giving me an ability to do that and to ask those questions about myself and my relation to other people.
Yes.
Because
It
it's
kind of reminds me of what you said there, kind of reminds me of a quote that one of my teachers used to say. And it's, planning is priceless, but plans are useless. So
yeah,
it's like it's good to have an overall sense of where you're going and what you want to accomplish. But then at the end of the day, there is this higher force that is guiding you, and that plan could totally go out the window,
that's
right? And it could
yeah.
turn into something completely different.
Yeah, isn't that exactly why we as artists hate the idea of like writing an artist statement? Because it's like I'm supposed to codify everything I do in this 300 word paragraph
Oh
that's
my gosh.
now locks me in for all eternity. And I
Right.
don't even, it's such a weird phenomenon. Why do we do that? It's just, it's, look, it's got nothing to do with what it actually means to be an artist. This is just for the sake, we do it for the sake of trying to draw people into looking at what we make.
Right.
I feel like I'm constantly discovering why I do it. Like, which sounds weird. Like if somebody said, why do you make this particular kind of sculpture? I can answer it in part, but the answer is only going to come through the completion of the story of my life story, and
Yeah.
then the answer will be, for other people to engage in pursuing that answer. But um, one of the things that I like about figurative sculpture, the or the figure, is that it has this almost animistic quality that I like. Like I really believe in this with objects. That they material culture isn't just a neutral thing. That it's part of who we are as human beings. Like the room I'm sitting in with my objects here and the books and whatever. This is like my brain space, not just this, right?
Right.
Not just it. And when I'm making a sculpture and I'm depicting another human being, that that depiction becomes also part of my brain space.
Mhm.
They become a character in my story, and I really like that idea. It's like I made this character that is now I'm now communicating with, uh, and I have to give them the agency to do that. Like I have to give the object and the image or whatever it is the agency to communicate to me. I'm not dictating everything. I'm a participant. I like that idea. So
Cool.
anyway, it's one of the things that compels me to keep going. That I'm learning things too.
Well, you
Hopefully,
certainly, we could talk for hours and
I
hours.
know.
We should probably wrap up this interview, but I just want to say that you are such an amazing artist. And like just in the short time that we've known each other, I've gained so much inspiration from you, and you've helped me so much. Just talking about like you have this gift of not putting yourself in a box or constraining yourself to one particular thing, or ideology or title, and it's just been really inspirational for me as another artist and as your friend, to be around that sort of conversation. And you're one of the most humble artists that I know. So just thank you so much for chatting with me today. And I can't wait to get this out there and share it with others, so they can learn from you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's fun to always talk with you. I enjoy it. I mean, you're right. We could go on for hours. And hopefully other people enjoy it just as much as I enjoyed it.
Totally. And we'll have to do this in person sometime, hopefully
Yeah,
sometime soon when all this craziness is over.
yeah. We can go through my books on my shelf, and
I'm definitely going to raid that bookshelf.
yeah, it'd be fun. It'd be fun. I had some people here just recently, and the books ended up. Oh, I can show you. Look, like half the books ended up on the table. We're just going through books
Oh,
and yeah, just pouring through ideas. It's exciting. It's like the word. the world of ideas is so exciting.
It's unending. It's
Yeah.
unending. And that's why we're here, right? We're here to inspire each other, and we're here to create and, leave a little bit of what's inside of us in the world, right? And hopefully make the world a more beautiful place to live in and be in,
Yeah,
right?
that's the hope. Yep,
All right,
that's what.
Brian. Well, you enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll talk to you again soon.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Okay.
That was fun.